Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue talking about using supply and demand, chapter 5. Remember that our chapter goals are to apply supply and demand model to real-world events, demonstrate the effect of a price ceiling and a price floor on markets, explain the effect of excise taxes and tariffs on markets, explain the effect of quantity restrictions on a market, and explain the effect of third-party payer systems on equilibrium price and quantity. So we're moving to government intervention. So these are going to be things that the government can come in and impose on the market. And when we think about the government intervention, usually we have good intentions there. We want to see if there's any bad effects on it or how government intervention will affect the economy given supply and demand, given economics, given this model. So the invisible hand is not the only factor in determining prices. Social and political forces also determine price. So other factors, price ceilings and floors. So we'll talk about some examples of when the government might determine that they should come in and set a price ceiling and floor, and we got to see what the effects will be. Excise tax and tariffs. So obviously taxes and tariffs will have an effect on these models, and we'll see what those implications could be. Quantity restrictions. So we could set restrictions on how much quantity should be produced or imported or these types of things. Third-party payer markets. So we're going to take a look at third-party payer markets in the context of these models. So government intervention, we're going to first start off with a price ceiling. So when a government wants to hold prices down to favor buyers, it imposes a price ceiling. So that is the government coming into the market and saying, hey, whoever's selling this, you cannot sell it for more than this price. And of course, the intention of that is to help the consumer. So if there's a need out there and the government says or comes to the conclusion that there's a consumer need and they feel they're going to step into the system and say that the price has to be restricted, notice that we're stepping into the market and we are now putting a restriction on the owner of that property's ability or right to sell the property for whatever price is they want, which is the market price. So we'll take a look at an example of this and see what the cause and effects could be. A price ceiling is a government-imposed limit on how high a price can be charged. Price ceilings create shortages. So if we set a price below the equilibrium, we say that this particular good has to be sold, or service or whatever, has to be sold below what the normal price would be at equilibrium prices given the invisible hand, then people, of course, we know that are going to want more because the demand is, we'll look at this pictorially in a second, but the demand is going to go up. People are going to want more of it because the price is now lower than equilibrium. And we know that the suppliers are going to want to supply less because there's less profit to be made. Therefore, less people are going to go into that line of business and produce that particular product because it's less profitable to do so. So price ceilings below equilibrium price will have an effect on the market. With price ceilings, existing goods are no longer rationed entirely by price, so other methods of rationing arise. So I'll talk more about that in a second. But there's a problem when when there's a system where there's too much. There's a short when we're not at equilibrium. There's going to be something other, and it's forced to be that way by something other than the market forces. Then something other than price is going to have to determine who gets what. And that's usually bad because that means that people are going to make decisions on something other than price. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a second. But here's just the classic example of when this might happen. If we have, say, rent controls here, after World War II, rent controls, a form of price ceiling, were put in place. And we've seen this is in Paris. We've seen it here as well in the US. And what could end up happening is if this is the equilibrium and then the government comes in and says, well, instead of 17, we have to be at $2.50, then, well, what's going to happen? We've now reduced the price below equilibrium. When the price goes down, what's going to happen to demand? More people are going to want that. So more people are going to want, in this case, the rent, to rent the places. And what's going to happen to quantity? Well, over time, quantity is going to go down because people are going to stop investing in rental properties in that area because they can't make any money on that. So you're going to have this shortage that will happen here. There would not be a shortage in rents had been allowed to increase to the equilibrium price. So obviously, if there was no government intervention, we would just go to this equilibrium price here. Okay, so what are some implications of this? Just to point out a few things. I mean, if we have more demand, way more demand than supply, the natural thing would be that the renters would increase rent until things equal out. They can't do that here. So notice what's going to happen then. What's the renter going to do? They're going to have to make decisions. They got all these people lined up that want to rent. They're all qualified. They all can afford it. And but the renter needs to decide now who is he gonna rent to, he or she going to rent to. And if they can't decide, if a decision cannot be made on price, it's got to be made on some other decision. And notice that can lead to weird things happening, like renting to family members over other members or something like that, or renting to friends, or making some other types of arrangements, such as renting to someone who's going to help out with the maintenance on the building and these types of things. And so that's kind of a negative consequence. Normally, we would rather have people making decisions based on the market and based on price, because that's kind of something that's not going to be biased in particular ways. It should be, the person best suited, or the person who's going to pay the equilibrium price or whatever should be the determining factor. Otherwise, you come up with strange factors. And then what could happen in the long run, of course, is that if these people can't charge the rental price that would be at equilibrium, the person that owns the building could have an incentive to not maintenance the building as much as they would if they needed to keep it up in order to keep the rent prices up. And that could lead to the neighborhood going down, of course, and we've seen this happen. So the neighborhood could go from a fairly decent neighborhood to a fairly poor neighborhood based on a rent control such as this. So good intentions could have some negative consequences, really need to be considered before putting this into place, because if that happens at an extreme measure over a long period of time, you end up with slums, basically, because the place could be deteriorated to a significant point. So these are things that need to be in consideration when we step into the market. So government intervention price floors. Let's talk about the other way. When a government wants to prevent a price from falling below a certain level, to favor suppliers, it poses a price floor. So this is going to be the opposite, of course. A price floor is a government-imposed limit on how low a price can be charged. Price floors create excess supply. A price floor above the equilibrium price have no effect. So let's look at the picture on this. So the classic example here would be a minimum wage. So a minimum wage is going to look a little bit different than some of the graphs we had, but it's the same concept. So we're going to have wage per hour on the vertical and quantity of workers on the horizontal. And so if we think about that, then we got the same kind of equilibrium. We're going to say if the wages are here, this is our equilibrium wage, and the equilibrium quantity would be here. Now, if we set a government policy which has good intentions, which is trying to set a higher minimum wage, which is livable, that's the concept, then the minimum wage would be higher, theoretically, than the equilibrium wage for this type of worker. And we have to consider what the consequences of that could be. If that happened, and if we increase the minimum wage, then the supply of workers is going to go up, because now we're talking about the suppliers being the people that are supplying the work. The workers here are going to go up. They're going to want to enter into the workforce. They're going to say, hey, that minimum wage is worth my time. I'm now going to enter into the market. So you're going to have these people from here to here that are saying, hey, that is now worth my time. I'm going to enter the market. And on the demand side, the people that are providing the jobs in this case, they have the higher cost, so they're basically going to say that the quantity will go down that they need. They're going to want demand less. So what ends up happening is that you have less jobs out there theoretically, and you have more workers out there, and that could be a negative consequences, because of course the idea is that we want to have equal or greater amount of jobs up there and have the increase in wages so that we have a cost of living increase. But we need to consider that what happens in terms of just the economy, and just in terms of human nature, in terms of the social science here, and see if there's any negative consequences. How can we implement the minimum wage or some kind of social safety net that will be most effective? Because what we want to do is increase the amount of employment, and this could possibly decrease the amount of employment. Also note that we have the same problem that we had before, in that if we have a bunch of people that want to join into the workforce, and we have a limited amount of jobs available, then what ends up happening is we got a bunch of people that are qualified. You got a line out the door of people that are qualified for a certain position, and the natural thing then would be, okay, to reduce the price down to the equilibrium price, and that is what would be the determining factor. Who is willing, who is best suited, best qualified to work the job given the equilibrium price. But if you can't reduce the equilibrium price and you have a bunch of qualified individuals, then the question is, how do you make the decision? You can't make the decision just based on price and skill level, because there's a whole bunch of people that are qualified. So again, that leads to kind of things that could be negative in the market as well, including, hiring people that are overqualified, who are willing to work an easier job because it gets paid more, or people trying to hire family or friends, and these types of things could end up happening more often if we interfere with the market like that. Because what we really want in a fair marketplace, when someone applies for a job, you would think that the factors that should have one person get the job over the other person who's the most qualified and who's going to work for the equilibrium price. Those are generally the factors. Those are what we really want to make the decision on. We don't really want to open the door to making decisions in other ways. And when we have shortages or surpluses, that leads to other types of ways that decisions get made, and that could be a negative consequence as well.